We started with our public hearings on July 18th, and we are finishing up today, July 21st. The hearings are to A, examine the rise in incidents of gun crime in Anguilla; B, undertake a situational analysis of the incidents of gun crime and gang violence in Anguilla; C, examine the causes of the existing situation as it relates to the rise in incident of gun crime and gang violence; D, seek to detail the impact of gun crime and gang violence on individuals, families, and the community; E, promote an understanding of the potential solutions and mitigation methods to the rising incidents of gun crime and gang violence as drawn from international and regional best practice; F, examine any matters related to the questions at hand; and G, recommend to the Assembly and those concerned strategies to address the issue. The members of the committee are Honorable Single Island-wide Member, Mr. Kenneth Hodge; Honorable Member for Valley South, Ms. Deanne Kentish Rogers; Honorable Single Island-wide Member, Mr. Joseph Vanterpool; Honorable Single Island-wide Member, Mr. Kyle Hodge; Honorable Member for Valley North, Mrs. Shelia Rogers-Webster; and special members assisting the committee, Mr. Rudolph Proctor and Mrs. Hyacinth Bradley. My name is Merrick Richardson. I am the chair of the committee. We'll start with a word of prayer.
Our Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you for your goodness. Thank you for your mercies. Thank you for bringing us all here safely. Lord, as we continue the work of this committee, oh God, continue to give us wisdom and guidance. Lord, be with us in today's session. In your precious name, Jesus, amen.
Yes, good morning again. Today, we have with us Mr. Delvin Hodge. Welcome, sir. Thanks for accepting our invitation to see if we can get a little insight and a little in-depth from your views on gun violence and gang crime in Anguilla. I'll invite you to start with your opening remarks.
Well, good morning to everyone. Yes, good morning. Yes, it's working. No problem.
Testing.
Okay, Mr. Hodge, you can continue.
Yes, good morning, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to attend this session this morning. I think that it is a timely formation of a committee, perhaps long overdue, and hopefully we can share in very fruitful discussion this morning where we can extract those things that are pertinent and implement as best as the government can. And hopefully society is listening and is willing to play a part in bringing about the reform that is needed to manage gun crime and violence in Anguilla.
Good morning, Mr. Hodge.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Great, thanks. And yourself?
I'm doing well.
So before I get into my questions coming from your professional capacity as a lawyer, as a citizen of Anguilla, as a young man, what are your views as to Anguilla's current situation as it pertains to gun crime and violence in our community?
Well, I think that primarily we're dealing with a socioeconomic issue. It is one where, unless it is ameliorated soonest, what we will ultimately experience is a loss in reputation as an island and continued instability within our institutions. That's including the family unit. And so I think that understanding the cause and effect is not straightforward, especially in our context because of our geographic position in the region. But I do believe that some steps need to be taken urgently to bring about some reform.
Please explain for me and the listening public what you mean from your point of view when you say that the issue is socioeconomic.
Okay, socioeconomic in the context that, let's use our main industry as an example. When we demonstrate to the outside world that we have volatility in terms of crime, particularly gun violence, it causes persons who would otherwise want to travel to a safe destination to seek alternatives. In turn, that causes loss of employment opportunities because we have a decrease in tourist numbers, and it impacts the household and our communities in turn. Persons become less disposed financially, and so they make different choices. The food that they eat, the clothes that they wear. If a family member can't work a full day at one place of employment, they'll find multiple jobs, leaving an empty household. So the socioeconomic fallout is multidimensional, and so I hope that I've answered your question. Yes?
Indeed you have, and thank you very much. From your professional capacity, you would have, of course, we don't expect you to be able to discuss any details. However, you would have unique insight and perspectives as to what some of the causes of gun crime and violence are in Anguilla, or what some of the issues are that are perpetuating this. So from that point of view, as a lawyer, what are some of the things that, a while ago you mentioned we need to take certain steps. What are some of the steps you think that we could take that would truly be effective to fixing this issue?
Okay, so in discussing this issue, I think that we need to separate what we are speaking of. So when we say gun crime, we first should recognize that gun crime comes in different forms, in the sense that you have simple possession of a firearm, meaning that there is no aggravating context to it. So it is a person, by analogy, who is found to be in possession of a firearm at home in the house under a mattress. That's considered gun crime. And then you have gun crime where a person is involved in a robbery in possession of a firearm. That's a different type of gun crime. Yes? So if we were to assess the numbers that come before the court system, and I'm speaking here from my observations, I'm not speaking on behalf of any institution or any body of persons, this is my observation. What you find is that at least 60% of the persons who have their first interaction with a court in respect of a firearm is in respect of simple possession, meaning that this is not a person who has committed a murder with a firearm. It's not a person who's committed a robbery with a firearm. This is a person who has in their possession a firearm without being enforced a firearm user's license. And I think that that is important to understand, because Anguilla has provisions in our Firearms Act that make it possible for persons to acquire a firearm user's license. Now, a person who does not obtain one, either by not applying or applies and is unsuccessful but is later found in possession of a firearm, is ultimately going to be convicted of possessing a firearm, which impacts statistically what we say is gun crime. Okay? But that should not be, in my view, regarded as the same as when we speak about murders and robberies. Okay? And hopefully during today's session, you'll allow me to get back to that particular topic, which is what we can do to put in place a more robust regime for persons to acquire firearm users licenses, and you'll understand a little later why I think that that is something that we should give serious consideration to as a society. The other element of this is that you have possession of firearm in respect of acts of murder and robbery. And when you say what is the cause, I would start first with the need for education. Now, when I say education, I'm not talking about persons obtaining a formal education like learning math, English, and science. I'm simply talking about education specific to firearms. Now, I know that is an oddity in a society like ours because we perhaps have certain phobias about firearms. But just to make the point, if one were to assess a jurisdiction like Switzerland, before coming here, I did a quick search on Switzerland. Switzerland has about 8.7 million people, and about 2.3 million of those persons are registered gun owners. But Switzerland has a near zero rate for violence involving. Now, that stands out to me because their process in respect of firearm ownership is inculcated from a tender age. So boys and girls are educated about firearms in Switzerland. Now, one may make the argument, if you want to be devil's advocate, that the Swiss believe in the military service and therefore there is reason why such a large number of persons are registered gun owners. Well, let us not be so narrowly focused on that point, because what we're talking about still are human beings who are registered gun owners and must have conflict with each other, but yet they manage to maintain such a low rate of violence. And what stands out to me is education. And I think that if you want to look at this issue a bit broader, when COVID affected Anguilla, what did we do? We educated the public. So we said, let's maintain a social distance of X amount of feet. Because scientifically, we've learned that this can reduce the incidence of cases. We said, let's practice better hygiene. That was our response. When HIV and AIDS was affecting the world, we educated the public. You didn't say, let's put a ban on sexual activity. So I think in a similar way, we need to embrace the reality that firearms is going to continue to impact societies around the world. And earlier, I raised the point that our geographic location is a factor to Jose's question about causation. Anguilla is situated in an archipelago. We have limited resources to expend to border protection. So what does it mean? It means that our borders are being penetrated on a regular basis, and we can't expect it to be practical for government to expend its resources to put officers on the border 24 hours of the day. It's not a realistic solution. So if that is so, then it means that we must have a situation where the people who live here have an appreciation for the responsibility that comes with possessing a firearm, both in terms of the legal consequences of it, the social fallout, the hurt caused to family members by use of it, education. So that what I am suggesting is that the people who come into contact with firearms are better equipped mentally. They are disciplined to understand how these things work, how they impact society. And by doing that, I think overall you'll see a change in behavior. Now, back to Switzerland. The purpose of their operation is to create what they call armed neutrality. Right? What armed neutrality simply is this. If Mr. Proctor runs a store and I have a sinister plan to take from Mr. Proctor his hard earnings, I will give thought to the neutralizing factor that perhaps if I enter, Mr. Proctor might meet me with the same degree of force that I can meet him with, armed neutrality. So I think that separate from educating people, there needs to be consideration for the effectiveness of armed neutrality. And I believe that at some point in time, the legislators consider this fitting because they put in our Firearms Act the provision that a person can acquire a firearms user's license. Now, Jose, Mr. Vanterpool, I don't want to keep going, but this is a very broad subject, and I'm hitting on your question, but as I speak, obviously, there are things that are pertinent. So, would you permit me?
Yes, definitely.
Okay,
Yes,
so
definitely.
on the Firearms Act and the process for the acquisition of firearms users licenses, I think that Parliament should give consideration to some refinement, and I say that for this reason. The Commissioner of Police is the authority to determine the grant of a firearm user's license. The Act requires of him to consider an application on the basis of whether or not there is good reason for granting a firearm user's license. Sorry. Okay.
Mr. Hart, just give us 1 second. We seem to be experiencing some technical difficulties.
Okay.
So just 1 minute. So just don't lose,
Sure.
don't lose your train of thought.
I won't.
Good morning, everyone. We are back. We apologize for that break. We experienced some technical difficulties, but we are back up and running now. So we'll continue. We will start with a question from Miss Kentish Rogers. Miss Rogers, you're there? Go ahead. We're barely hearing you. The volume is down.
No.
Just give us 1 second.
Okay. Okay, no, this ain't working.
Go ahead, Deanne.
This hook to this, and I can't get a volume up on this. No, because it coming through this.
Go ahead again.
Is this better?
Okay, Mr. Hodge, we seem to be, while we clear up things at that end, I'll just ask you to continue. And you
Okay.
can go ahead till we get that question.
Right. So I know that before the break, I was speaking on Switzerland as an example of a jurisdiction where there is a relatively high number of registered gun owners, but a very low rate of crime in respect to gun use or firearm use. Should I pause? Well, okay. Okay, right. So, what I was stating is that one of the fundamental mechanisms that is used in Switzerland to achieve such a low rate of violence with the use of firearms is inculcation from a tender age, boys and girls who acquire education and training in respect of the use of firearms and the ownership of firearms. And I did make the point that for a society like ours, that is an odd concept to even fathom. However, when one is assessing the potential causes for such a high rate of firearm use, I believe that education, like in Switzerland, where you expose persons from a young age to the realities of the use, ownership, and possession of firearms, as well as the legal implications in the context of whatever the extant laws are for whatever period of time, that it could go a long way in ameliorating the violence that we see with firearms. And the other concept that I see being applied in Switzerland is that of armed neutrality, which essentially says that proceed? Okay. Which essentially says that when a large number of persons in a society are equipped with equal or proportionate force. So to make the point I said earlier, that if Mr. Proctor is running a store and he has his hard-earned money, and I have a sinister motivation to go there to take what he has worked for with the use of a firearm, armed neutrality says that I may second guess imposing any force with a firearm on Mr. Proctor, because I know that he is capable of returning that same force to me, because he is a licensed firearm holder. So that was the crux of the point I was making during the period when we lost connectivity. But I then segued into what it means for us in the context of our Firearms Act. Because at present, the Commissioner of Police is the licensing authority. And I wanted to make the point that I think that there should be some refinement to the legislation in respect of the criteria that is applied for the grant of firearm users licenses. Currently, the Act requires that the Commissioner finds there to be good reason for there to be the grant of a firearm user's license. And I believe that the concept of good reason is far too subjective. I think there needs to be a more objective criteria so that, like what happens now, where the different positions of incoming commissioners of police impact on whether or not licenses are granted, is problematic. So that historically, there has not been much consistency in the grant of firearm users licenses, which I think is something to consider if it is that we were to aspire to arm neutrality, which is what I am proposing. And the reason why I'm proposing that is because not only is it effective in Switzerland, but I think there is a reality to our geographic location. As I stated previously during the interruption, we are situated in an archipelago, and government cannot be expected to come up with the financial resources required to keep our borders safe. So our borders are going to be penetrated on a regular basis, and there's not much that we can do long term to stop that. So what it means is that the people who live here need to have a better sensitization to the negative effects of firearm use and possession, but they also need to be entrusted through training and education to possess firearms. And that's how you achieve armed neutrality. I also made the point, and I'm not sure if this was captured before the interruption, but when we wanted to deal with COVID, HIV, and AIDS, we educated the public. We didn't put a ban on sexual activity, and we didn't put a ban permanently on physical contact. What we said was, practice good hygiene, social distance as much as you can, wear masks. To go further with the point, when planes were invented, they crashed. We didn't put a ban on airplanes. We perfected the technology. So what I'm saying, you have a problem with firearm use. I know that we are concerned, and I am concerned personally about the escalation in violence with firearms. Let's treat it in a different way. Let us get into the school system and bring about some consciousness first as to the negative effects, but understand that all of our children in school are going to be exposed to firearm use at some point in our society. And this is not an Anguilla problem. This is affecting the entire region, the UK, the US. But what we should be willing to do is to look objectively at those things that are working in some jurisdictions and implement them. To Jose's question, in respect of the cars, I highlighted the geographic location of Anguilla as one of the major hurdles that we have to overcome. Okay? People will continuously have access to firearms. The other aspect that is important to understand is that crime is committed where the opportunity exists. So, if we want to look at another example, you could look at the United Arab Emirates. In that jurisdiction, one might say that they are heavily policed, but there are things that are effective there. Perhaps CCTV. I know that many persons mention it, but it hasn't been implemented. And so, if you can effectively reduce the opportunity for persons to engage in crime with the use of firearms, whether it is trafficking of firearms, discharging of firearms, robberies, acts of murder with firearms, then I think that we would see improvement. So, let me recap. Education is a fundamental part of this thing, in my view. We need to aspire to armed neutrality. So, that may require some refinement of the legislation so that we have a less subjective criteria that is impacted by the revolving door that is the Office of the Commissioner of Police. Opportunity. Limit the opportunity for crime to take place. And there are very cost-effective ways to do it, like CCTV. Another one is lighting. Perhaps we consider putting some solar lights at vulnerable locations on the coast, in the forest. Let's light up the forest at night time. I mean, I'm not here looking for any political vote, so if people in the forest are offended, I'm sorry. But light up the forest at night time. Solar lights. Light up the ports at night time, more solar lights. Let us make it difficult for crime to exist. It doesn't have to be with us necessarily experiencing more incursions of our private rights, right? Because I have an issue with a police state, so I'm not proposing a police state. I don't think that that is necessary in our society. We all know each other, right? Another aspect that I think should be considered is the access that the marine sector or marine operators have to Anguilla. That is not as easily dealt with because obviously we operate in a tourism sector that needs to thrive based on flexibility within that sector. But some things to consider going forward, maybe, because, I mean, let's be real, firearms don't float on water, okay? And they don't swim. So they get here on things that float with engines. Perhaps it is something to consider to better regulate this issue. It's two-pronged. You first have as a requirement for registration a tracking system. Every airline that takes off from an airport is monitored on a system from a tower, and you can track their movement. The marine industry is a similar mode of transportation, and it's two-pronged in the sense it enhances safety, because at all times we would be able to monitor the position of a vessel. Now, if you have a vessel moving in your waters that is observed, that is not showing up on your tracking system, then that is your basis for suspicion. I think that we should give some consideration to it. And I'm not here suggesting that there is any heavy policing of the marine industry, because believe you me, there is a need for flexibility, okay? Particularly in the context of operators from St. Martin who will not be subjected to the same requirements and would be able to come into our waters without that tracking system. So it needs to be well thought out. But I think it is one of the things to consider that is cost effective and it is practical. If there are any more questions, I'll be happy to answer.
I do have some more questions. I have a lot, but the ones I want to ask about the legality of firearms, the other side that we haven't really heard so far. But before getting there, I'll turn over to some of my other committee members to give them a chance.
Okay, no problem.
I have the question that Ms. Kentish Rogers was trying to get in when we had the issues. So she wanted to get from you to understand the volume of cases since you started practicing that you believe is related to firearm possession, gun violence, and gang violence.
The last part of the question I didn't gather.
Okay, I'll start it over. She wanted to understand the volume of cases since you started practicing law that you believe are related to firearm possession, gun violence, and gang violence.
Okay, so in the beginning, I did touch on this somewhat. Generally speaking, at least 60% of the cases that come before the court involving firearms relate to simple possession. Bear in mind that Anguilla's murder rate hovers about maybe 1.3, 1.2 a year. Sometimes we have spikes, but generally speaking, we don't have a lot of murders involving firearms. I mean, for our population size, one can argue that it is too high. Okay, I think one is too much. But it is not, so when you look at the firearm crime, we should separate what is simple possession from possession with aggravating context. So burglary, robberies, murders. Okay? If it is that you want to approach it from the standpoint of murder by use of firearm, I think that, and I'm going a bit beyond her question because I believe I would have answered her question, and I did mention some of that when I started. But if you're looking at the use of firearms in more aggravating context, I think that our provisions need to be assessed for further amendment in this sense. So, simple possession of a 9mm firearm cannot, or should not, I should say, be treated the same as simple possession of an AK-47, even though it's simple possession without aggravating context. So, I think that some consideration, if you want to achieve a deterrent effect in respect of the caliber of firearms that persons may possess illegally, it is worth considering whether or not it needs to be tiered so that based on the caliber of firearm, even if it's simple possession, it graduates. Even if it is simply yeah, so it would graduate, right? And if you have instances where you have large numbers of ammunition, that it graduates as well. You can have that in your provisions if Parliament wants to look at the punitive measures. But my personal view is that our current setup in terms of the punishment is adequate. The courts have done a phenomenal job, in my view, and I'm not saying this in any way to assuage any court. I'm looking at it from the standpoint of what exists. So the penalty in the Firearms Act as it is now, on summary conviction, it is a fine up to $200,000 or 5 years imprisonment or both. For the High Court, it is a fine. It doesn't specify the dollar amount, and that is because the High Court has far-reaching jurisdiction, or 14 years, or both. And 14 years is imprisonment. 5 years, as I said, for summary, which is in the lower court, is imprisonment. In my view, that is adequate for this reason. In 2019, there was an attempt to harmonize the approach with sentencing throughout the Eastern Caribbean member states, which was a positive step in respect of firearm offenses. And what it allows is for magistrates and judges to operate within a broad framework so that their discretion isn't taken away, but how they approach sentencing is harmonized throughout these member states. Okay? And the beauty of it is that it really gives legs to what the common law is intended to achieve, which is this. As social norms change, judicial officers can apply punishment to match where we are as a society. And that is amazing. Okay? If one were to look at increasing the penalties for firearm offenses, you have to bear in mind that judicial officers are going to go through the same approach. So let us say, hypothetically, if you had a situation where possession of a firearm carried a sentence of life imprisonment, a person is not going to get life imprisonment for possessing a firearm if they're a first-time offender, because you would go through the process and ultimately they would get a period of time that is probably akin to what already exists. So that's why I'm saying revising the laws to increase the punishment is not necessarily a need that we face now. Now, I think I should say this. Because we have a revolving door in the Office of the Commissioner of Police, and because that revolving door is a door made, packaged, and sent down from a British society and a British legal system, what we have are false notions that you can come to Anguilla and typically what you see is the Commissioner of Police, and I'm not speaking about any specific Commissioner of Police, but the office holder would give directives to object to any person coming before the court charged with a firearm offense, things like that. I don't want to be too legalistic, but it is wrong. That's the first thing I'll say. The second thing is this. It would appear that because there is a different social and legal context in the UK, when persons come to fill the office, they mistakenly apply the authority so as to create something akin to mandatory minimum sentences by objecting to things or being sticklers for certain things when you get the opportunity at sentencing. Now, I will give more credit. I think that the Attorney General's chambers does an excellent job of managing these matters in a way that marries well with the public good. And bear in mind that the public good here, you're considering not only those impacted, but you're considering the life of an offender and what the circumstances are in every case and how best to treat it so that you achieve those aims that were intended when a person is sentenced, okay? But in the context of the Office of Commissioner of Police, I do believe that one of the problems that we have faced is a lack of continuity in the rule. So not only do you have the cultural and legal misapprehensions, but you also have the lack of opportunity for implementation, long-term implementation. So let's use as an example. We have a new Commissioner of Police now. The previous office holder was here for a very brief period of time. I'm not commenting on his work, but it would appear to me impractical to expect there to be any real results in such a short period of time. It would appear that way. And now you have a new Commissioner of Police, and it is unclear how long he will be here for. Parliament, in my view, needs to do a better job of making recommendations in a forceful and meaningful way as to who holds that office. It should be, in my view, persons who have cultural affinity. It's important. One must appreciate that the UK does not have a fix for their own weapons trafficking problems and their own gun crime. In fact, they've had in the last year, and this was up to February of 2023, a 2,500% increase in gun crime incidents. 2,500% up to February of 2023. I assessed that this morning before coming here. Okay? So when we are looking to take solutions from outside of Anguilla, we must be realistic that cultures are different, geographic positioning is different, topography is different. So you can't expect, simply because we are a colonial state, that we will get a solution simply because it is not one of us. I think the solutions exist here. But Parliament should do a better job of ensuring that people who are qualified and have the cultural affinity hold the office. And I'm not putting any plug here for anybody. I'm looking at my observations of what has transpired. Okay? If you assess the tenure of commissioners of police, what we've had is very brief periods, and then there is instability or dislike for a particular way something was handled, and then we change the office holder and expect that you will have improved results. But it doesn't work that way, clearly, because this office holder came in, and within about 2 weeks of his arrival in Anguilla, there was gun crime. Right? So that is one of the factors that we should consider. So just to recap everything that I've suggested, right? So education, number one on the list. It has to be. People need to understand what firearm use and possession comes with. Armed neutrality, important. The next thing is the opportunity for crime. We need to manage it better. I've set out a host of things that can be done in respect of limiting the opportunity that is cost effective for government, because government cannot be held responsible for some of these ills. The money has to come from somewhere, and it is not a sensible approach to expect that government will inject millions of dollars into keeping borders safe. So we have to find practical solutions, and I've set those up. The other aspect of it is, to achieve armed neutrality, we need to consider refinement of the Firearms Act, as I said. And in essence, you give life to the intention of Parliament, which was for persons to have firearms lawfully. That clearly was the intention. So you give effect to it by putting a criteria in place that is more objective. Okay? So if there's anything else, I would be happy to answer.
Okay, good morning, Mr. Hodge.
Good morning.
You focused a lot this morning on the Swiss model, and you said that it is one of the lowest, they have one of the lowest rates of gun crime.
Yep.
And you also spoke a lot about armed neutrality. You just ended by saying that too. My thing is, it seems that you achieve armed neutrality through, you said it earlier too, inculcated culture. So for me, that's like a generational thing that takes a while.
It does.
To build up trust.
It does.
Respect and love and those kind of attributes. Now, if we look at the American model, it is a model that culturally we follow in the Caribbean, right or wrong. That is the model that we follow. And just, without doing the research, I think America would have one of the highest rates of gun crime. And they also have a sense of gun culture that, we have the right to bear arms. So when you look at Anguilla, a small society, culturally, I think we are far from there. How do you propose? How do we move from one culture to the next? How do we accept something that is new? our mentality? Are we ready to even start thinking of armed neutrality?
Right. Well, the question is well taken. In the U.S., I think what we see a lot of is the access to firearms, legitimate access to firearms, but there is the absence of education that goes with it. It is very different to what you see happening in Switzerland. Bear in mind that in Switzerland, they're starting with boys and girls who are minors. In fact, in my reading, these persons have competitions as to who will be the king or queen, the best shooter, and these are children doing this. Now, I'm not saying in any way that Anguilla is going to turn into the Wild Wild West, because clearly Switzerland is not. What I'm simply saying is that we need to begin the process of accepting that firearms will exist in society. That's the beginning stage of this discussion. If anybody can come up with a solution to eradicate firearms, then we don't need to talk about armed neutrality. But we need to be practical. So if firearms are going to be here, then what is the best way to respond to that? We can dedicate millions of dollars in resources and realize at the end that firearms are still being trafficked into society. Or we can penetrate the minds of the people who hold them. And the best way to start that process is from tender age, primary school. That's the best place to start. And in the past, I think that very valiant attempts have been made by church leaders, community leaders, to bring about a sense of compassion, to sensitize people as to the adverse effects that gun crime has on families and persons in society generally. But that is not enough. This needs to be something that, as part of, for instance, physical education, you introduce a component, just like you would for personal education in high school, where they introduced topics on sexual activity, the use of protection for safe sex. That was forbidden at one point in Anguilla too. People did not want that introduced. But around the world it has taken place, and we've seen the positive trend in terms of the transmission of sexual disease. So in a similar way, we need to embrace the reality that it has to start with us educating persons.
Good morning, Mr. Hodge.
Morning.
I have attended a number of conferences during my time as a police officer, and I've never heard any mention as it relates to the Switzerland situation and the effectiveness of neutrality. I also held a view as well, being the commissioner of police and had the authority of issuing licenses, of trying to educate some people as well who are applying for licenses that the same way you explained quite elegantly about somebody coming to rob somebody who has a firearm will think twice about doing so.
Not necessarily the case all the time,
right?
But it is a factor that persons will consider.
Yeah, you will consider that. And at the same time, I also used to tell some of the people who were applying for licenses that a guy on the outside, knowing that you have one, will take a different posture to how he enter to rob you as well,
of course.
which would be deadly. Now, in terms of the way we do things in Anguilla with regards to issuing firearm licenses, do you feel we have reached that point where we need a firearm licensing authority that would take on more of this education to the public than we are now?
I do believe that the concentration of authority in the hands of a single office holder is problematic for the reasons I've given, separate from there needing to be a refinement of the criteria. If you have a broader grouping of persons, almost like what we did with business license applications, you essentially have persons from within our society who sit on a committee applications are made, persons must meet the criteria, and you make determinations from there. And beyond that, I think that separate from having a broader base licensing authority, I do believe that associations need to be formed on this particular issue of firearms and safe use of firearms. And in that context, I think that we can achieve some of the aims of educating the public and safe use of firearms, and perhaps those who are interested be trained. Bear in mind, not everybody has an interest in the use or ownership of firearms, and hopefully nobody ever has to use them. But along the way, we need to create some structure around this issue, or else we'll continue to have situations where persons who are simply in possession, not intending to go out and commit a robbery, not intending to go out and commit a murder, will find themselves before the court convicted of possessing firearms, which is happening frequently with young men. Okay, so.
Thank you.
Before getting into my original question, I do have a quick supplementary based on your last statement. That what's happening frequently is that we're getting cases of young men being caught in simple possession of firearms. It then brings about the question to me, why? Why do our young men feel the need to walk around and be in possession of firearms, even if they are not about to use it in an aggravated situation?
Right. So I'm happy that you raised that, because that's the very next thing I was going to say in response to this question, but I said I would wait. It is clear that good people in society have genuine phobias if you're within a certain age group based on territorial rivalry. It is unfortunate that we're here, but I think that over time, this issue has become so embedded in our society that now persons have formed very intense and, in some respects, unshakable emotions about each other, that the fear exists, and the fear is a legitimate fear. And so persons sometimes are in possession of firearms unlawfully because of that fear. And I'm happy that you directed that question to me, because I want to say this in the context of that regular occurrence. Parliament needs to give some consideration, and I know that this has been discussed by Ms. Kentish Rogers, and I'm hoping that it's going to be acted upon soon, which is this: expunging criminal records. Too many young men, because of our unfortunate social context, where they feel legitimate fear of retaliation or harm to their person, are found in possession of firearms, and they end up with convictions for firearm offenses. What are we going to do? Allow a breakdown in society over the next 20 years because most of these young men can't gain employment at a resort? Here's the reality. Most of the hotels don't want young men being employed there if they have convictions for any type of crime. If you include a conviction for possession of firearm in that mix, they're certainly not going to be hired. And we all know that as part of your application process, your police record is one of the things that is asked for. Right? So it is a pressing need for us to consider, not just in respect of firearms, but in respect of all offenses, the need to expunge records. And that's why I said to you earlier as well that I don't think that a solution is necessarily increasing police presence necessarily, or increasing punishment, because what ultimately we would be doing is creating a substantial socioeconomic fallout. Exponential is the better word, Because ultimately, if these fears continue to exist in society, persons will continuously and wrongfully be in possession of firearms without a firearms user's license, find themselves before the court with convictions, and all you're doing is depleting from your workforce those able-bodied young men who could go and work in a hotel or work in any other private sector job, but they can't be trusted because their record says that they have a conviction for a firearm.
And on the other hand, Mr. Hodge, how would we balance it in the fact that if we, and I'm all for a period of time of expunging some offenses and convictions
Yes.
that people have, because there are some that are on the books, and those people have
Years,
farm,
many
right?
years.
But employment in the hospitality section,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember a case, which I wouldn't refer to, where there was a gentleman who committed an offense, having a record that I think the hotel probably didn't know about. And we know some of the clients at those facilities come from countries where they are quick to take out suits, lawsuits against people for anything that happened on those compounds. How will we balance it out if there was a guy who is a known criminal, have a conviction sheet for firearm crimes, and go on one of those compounds and commits a crime? How would we balance that against the action that those clients may take against the facility and maybe whoever else expunges the conviction?
I share your concern, but this is not going to be a perfect solution. What you're trying to do is to see how you can achieve an outcome that is more likely than not to be in the public good, not one that is going to be impenetrable, right? So in a case like that, obviously, you're exposed significantly. In other jurisdictions, I know that they have implemented things like registers. I don't want to be a proponent of it. Bear in mind that part of my livelihood is as a defense counsel, right? But and I wouldn't necessarily want our small society to get caught up in there being registers like sex offender registers and firearm conviction registers and the like. But that is a way in which you can ensure transparency in respect of persons who have been convicted, right? But that is problematic in a small society because it means that a person, even though reformed, would never be able to outlive the occurrence, but we don't have enough procreation taking place for us to revive our labor force sufficiently, right? And there is a large number of young men who are finding themselves before the court system, okay? And so we need to be cautious with how Parliament operates, given the fact that you don't want to take away your best resources. Women and men, young women and men, to take away those from the workforce would be problematic. So there's some balance, and perhaps we can discuss some of those nuances separate from this live forum. Yes.
Thank you, sir.
One of the interesting things that I noted from your proposal earlier, when you said that there should be a different or a tiered system with respect to dealing with persons who have simple offenses, is that you focused on one, amount of ammunition, because that could, I guess, distinguish intent, and two, the caliber of ammunition. So I had a chance to look at our Firearms Act, and I'm aware that the police in Anguilla are only able standard to carry 9mm. And by virtue of that, any licensed firearm holder can only carry up to the caliber that the police has. Again, that means 9mm. That means that any legal firearm holder, whether police or civilian, can only carry up to 9mm. From some of the police reports that were being put out, and even occurrences we're seeing not only in Anguilla but throughout the region, we'd have seen a case in St. Vincent, if not yesterday or the day before, where I saw a video where a high-powered rifle was used.
I saw that.
And 6 persons went down in a single go. And we are seeing that persons are being caught here with firearms of 40 caliber, 45, which are all, for the listening public, if they don't know, greater calibers than our police here are able to carry. Is this something that you think needs revision or consideration?
So I believe that police should be equipped internally, which is at police headquarters, with the requisite caliber of firearm and ammunition to respond to a threat or an ongoing situation. But I don't believe that police in our society, bearing in mind that we are not a police state, democratic society, relatively small population, people who know each other, that we should be walking somewhere and see police carrying an AK-47 and the like. That should not be a custom in our society. But I do believe that there is a need for police to be armed internally so that their artillery includes weaponry that can outmatch or outperform the most lethal threats that exist. And you've raised a very good point, because when it is that you have a situation like what Anguilla has geographically, where our borders are going to continuously be penetrated, the range of firearms and the caliber of ammunition that can come ashore is limitless. So clearly there is a need for some visitation to that. And perhaps in the context of doing so, there will be greater consideration given to persons who engage in that activity, that the police can respond fittingly if the need arose. So that is my view on that.
And just to get your perspective on something quickly, you'd have mentioned just now that because of Anguilla and where we are culturally, we wouldn't expect to see police officers walking around with AK-47s, and I completely agree with you on that. But that brought up the thought that, especially as we're going into our carnival season, historically, I see year by year there's a debate based on how police officers appear before the public during these situations. So take, for example, I remember a few years ago, I believe under Commissioner Morrison, there was a photo that went viral and sparked a lot of debate in the community because it had a lot of the task force members with the long barrel rifles, again, all chambered in 9mm. And then there was a debate going on Facebook as to, oh, this is not how we should represent, people are watching. But then on the flip side of that, they were saying handguns would be sufficient. On the flip side, when you talk to persons versed in firearms, they would say that those longer range guns are actually safer for crowd control because they are more accurate at a distance. They're able to, pretty much you wouldn't have to worry about firing into a crowd. So now we have to balance the effectiveness of the method in bringing out the weapons to accurately combat versus the optics of the public. Perhaps this is something that education might fix, but what is your views on that in terms of striking that balance?
So I like to approach stuff like this based on the effectiveness. If one looks at whether or not there have been firearm occurrences when the police presence has been so heavy in public, I think that we can all agree that the results have been positive. So that's how I look at it. Is it effective? And the answer to that is yes. I have seen them armed heavily during parade, Juve morning. I've seen them, and I don't recall there being any firearm occurrence since the implementation of that strategic measure. So that's my view. And if the public, I think at this stage, I think the public has been sensitized to open carry of that appearance, because it's not a high caliber, but it is obviously a very large device. So I think the public has been sensitized. I think people simply walk past the police now when they see them and appreciate their presence when they're there carrying in that way. So I think that society has evolved beyond the issue. I know initially, yes, it was a problem. Many persons, including me, I was very apprehensive about seeing it. I thought it was a bit too loud, a bit too perhaps unnecessary at the time, but it served its purpose, and I think most persons are pleased that they can go to a Juve morning now and know that there is the capability, if necessary, for the police to disarm offenders.
I would just want to say briefly in relation to that, sometimes the police department responses to intelligence that they have
Very true.
And want to be in a position, should anything arise, to be able to take care of it as opposed to have to go and come back.
Very true.
Mr. Hodge, from your profession, you no doubt would have represented both sides as it relates to violence of any sort, in defense of persons who have committed crime and victims of violent crime. This committee is charged with the responsibility to produce a report and recommendations on how we deal with this going forward. From your experience, how would you say to us in relation to how we can deal with both sides, put a recommendation for the youths who are defendants and those who are victims?
Okay, so first let me say that in recent times, there has been a concerted effort by the Attorney General's chambers to reform this area, not just with firearms, but broad-based in terms of young offenders. It is still being walked through. I think it should be supported because it gives an opportunity for young offenders to be rehabilitated, and not only be rehabilitated, but also to come out of their ordeals without a record, which is important, right? So we have new legislation that deals with that aspect, but bearing in mind that firearms, obviously, because it is a more serious type of offense, would not necessarily be captured in that legislative framework, okay? But I think we need to look at the school curriculum in a serious way. The Education Act, if it is necessary to revise it, so that what we do is bring about some education in the school system as it relates to gun crime and violence, safe use, possession, lawful possession of firearms. And beyond that, the rest is really strategic in terms of how Parliament and other institutions like the police look to manage the opportunity that people have for committing crime. All right, and as I would have mentioned earlier, there are ways in which you can approach that are cost effective, that suit our budgetary constraints and what our people can afford on a long-term basis. And armed neutrality. And I want to keep presenting that concept because I really think that until we realize that firearms are here to stay, then we'll continuously be having these discussions about what can we do. That is one of the things that is working. And just so that listeners don't misconstrue what I'm saying, I want to speak to, for instance, the Virgin Islands. Okay, they have a situation that is out of control, and persons are able to get licensed firearms there. But what is absent is the Switzerland model: education, early exposure to the responsibility, the risk, and the consequences of firearms. That is absent. So essentially, you attain the age of 18, and then you're able to become eligible to carry a firearm. That is problematic. In the US, you have a similar situation that is developing. Near anybody can go and get a firearm, but that doesn't make them aware of the responsibility of ownership of it, right? So there are enough examples for us to pull from as it relates to how we go about dealing with an education process.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, we have a history of gun crime, and it continues. So what would be your steps as it relates to
Short term?
short-term and long-term to achieving armed neutrality? Because we still have the mentality to deal with. We still have the East and West, quote-unquote, violence, gun violence you see happening amongst our young peers.
I think a way in which you can approach that question is this way. as we have it now, is what we're doing working?
No.
Right. So, and that question obviously wasn't for you, it was more like rhetorical in the sense that it is clear that changing the commissioner of police doesn't reduce the presence of gun crime. It is clear that the more we have these discussions, that it doesn't have a positive impact on reducing gun crime directly. Hopefully, it will ultimately when you implement. So, where does that leave us? It leaves us in a place where we are desperate for solutions. And so, the best way to approach it is, one, empirically. So, you assess what are those cases that are coming before courts? Are the police faced with? I'm sure at some point you will hear from a commissioner of police or the commissioner of police on these issues, and you can better assess what is the police experiencing in respect of gun crime and violence in Anguilla. And so from that context, you then know, okay, well, what we're dealing with is a lot of trafficking, most likely. We're dealing with a lot of persons out of fear being in possession. And so how do we treat that? The education route is going to take time, I agree with you. But in the short term, we can focus on limiting the opportunity. And that's why I stressed on that. So for now, what we can do that government can implement is, okay, well, how much would it cost to get 30 solar lights with enough lumens to light up the most vulnerable locations in Anguilla? And those solar lights walk from sunset to 4 in the morning. What can we do about that? Let's budget for it. Let's implement it. Obviously, there are going to be logistical challenges. There are private residents who may not want their areas lit. You walk through those issues. But that is, broadly speaking, one of the options. The other option is CCTV. I think what we have in Anguilla now is private residents or private business owners, they go and install their own security systems, or they try to petition persons to get units installed on poles, but that's not a sustainable way in which you protect a society. So clearly government needs to have a serious discussion, and I'm using the word serious deliberately because I believe that governments over many years, they've paid a lot of lip service to the idea of installing CCTV. I don't know what the impasse has been, but it doesn't seem reasonable that in spite of the spate of gun violence we've seen, that is taking so long to implement. It doesn't seem reasonable at all. So, short-term measures, lighting, CCTV. And I think that from those two things, what you would find is that a lot of the territorial rivalry that you see taking place where a person moves from one location, goes to another location to commit an act, it might still occur. But because of the police ability to respond to it evidentially, you will get the deterrent effect that you need. Let's look at the UK, for example. The UK had an increase in knife attacks. They had criminality flooding London. What do? Inject CCTV cameras throughout the city. And it positively impacted the occurrence of crime in the city. So clearly there is a positive correlation between the presence of surveillance and reduction in crime. These are things that we know. So why are we not implementing it? I don't know. Right? So.
Okay, Mr.
Yes.
Hodge, we are coming up onto the end of our session.
Sure.
I'll just give you one more question,
Okay.
and then allow you for your closing remarks.
No problem.
So thank you very much for your time this morning, Mr. Hodge. I really hope people were listening, as I found it to be quite enlightening. The final question I have for you, we spoke a lot about armed neutrality, the importance of education.
Mm-hmm.
For all of us, for everyone listening, I think that this is an important educational opportunity. When we talk about the legal aspects of going and getting a firearm in order for personal defense or defense of business, you mentioned about the risks associated, And I think that that's something that's not spoken about enough. I think the community probably has a view that if someone has a licensed firearm, they are kind of legally given the license to, I guess, pull it out, wheel it as they want. You just got a license to legally shoot somebody without worrying.
Like stand your ground.
So, in other words, can you please, for the listening public, detail some of the risks and responsibilities associated with legal carrying of a firearm so that they can really weigh out the pros and cons of deciding?
Okay. Well, that's not the most straightforward thing to answer, because bearing in mind that when you possess a firearm, that you deal with dynamic situations. But in the context of what the potential consequences could be as a holder of a firearm license, obviously you can be confronted by a threat, and how you respond could make the difference between whether or not you are deemed to be justified in your use of force, or whether or not you may find yourself charged with committing a crime yourself. So the mere legitimization of your possession doesn't make you free of the responsibility of responsible use, right? And obviously we know that there's great uncertainty when you find yourself confronted by criminal allegations, and there's cost implications and the like. So, and that's why I'm stressing so much on armed neutrality, because there are persons who will sit and listen and think, well, he's proposing that persons just all bear arms. But what they need to understand is that when you actually own one, you change everything about your life. It's almost like having a child. I remember myself and my cousin, Mr. Kyle Hodge, would spearfish on a regular basis. We both got children, and now we don't spearfish, right? It has to do with what comes with owning and possessing a firearm. Not everybody responds to the responsibility the same, but education can fill the gap. And none of these things that I'm suggesting means that we are going to go from where we are now to no crime in Anguilla with guns. All it means is that we put ourselves in a better position to manage it if it is we apply things that are working elsewhere. Before I conclude and give a closing statement, there is something that I needed to say, which is this. So, the rule of law. It is important. And when I speak about the rule of law, I speak about it in this sense. So, the rule of law, philosophically, is a political ideal where citizens and institutions will be all subject to the same laws, whether you're a lawmaker, a jurist, or a leader. And I do believe that when one assesses the integrity of institutions that apply law, like the police, like the Attorney General's chambers, like the court, that it is important that people who are subject to the law within Anguilla see it as being equally applied. That is very important. And so when you look at firearm use, it would be unfair to witness a situation where a person who is a well-known businessman in society, I'm just using a random analogy, a well-known businessman in society comes before a court, he gets a fine, but a young man who has a charge for firearm possession, he goes on remand. That creates a distrust within your system and a lack of confidence. And I think it has happened a number of times in our society where the rule of law has been compromised. And so young men who should respect law and order don't approach it with the reverence that is required because they see institutions as being inconsistent. Okay, so I just wanted to include that.
We can take your closing statements.
Okay.
now, yes.
So, yes, I thank you all for having me. It is a very useful forum, in my view. It allows for very fruitful discussion. There is a lot more that I think could be added to it. This forum obviously is not ideal for more clinical assessment of certain areas that we spoke about, but hopefully we can have an opportunity to have those discussions outside of this forum. I'll be happy to do so, recognizing that my professional capacity and my personal views as a citizen of Anguilla are disparate. They're not the same. So I take great pride in coming here as a citizen of Anguilla to offer what I can to positively contribute. And so hopefully those, I think, 5 nuggets that I suggested, and hopefully others did suggest similar things, because I think that it is clear where we need to go as a society. And I look forward to meeting with each of you again at some other opportunity where we can distill some of these things a little clearer. Thank you. Another question? Oh, sorry.
Mr. Hodge, thank you so much. And I think we will take that offer you just made. We will follow up on that. I'm also hoping I can meet you by a bar, something more, because some of these things I would really like a 2-hour, 3-hour discussion with you on.
No problem. Let me know. Hopefully everybody's invited and we can speak.
Everybody would be invited,
Yes.
you know, because I suspect armed neutrality is going to be a hot topic in Anguilla for a few days to come. I think you've opened a can. Hope that's going to pass.
Hopefully they are gummy worms.
Yes, hopefully of government bombs. But Mr. Hodge, we really do thank you for, first of all, accepting our invitation and being so frank and open with us. This has truly been a fruitful conversation. So,
Yes. Thank you for having me.
thank you once again. We will return. We are closing off this session, and we will be back in 5 minutes. So don't go too far away. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to our Gun Crime and Violence Select Committee of the 12th House, Anguilla House of Assembly, our public inquiry hearing on gun crime and gang violence and its associated issues. With us this morning, we have Mr. Henry Rogers, and he will be giving us his views on gun violence and gun crime in Anguilla. Mr. Rogers, welcome. I'll introduce all the members of the committee. For various reasons, everyone is not here, but I'll introduce everyone who's on the committee. The members of the committee are Honorable Single Island Wide Member, Mr. Kenneth Hodge, Honorable Member for Valley South, Ms. Deanne Kentish Rogers, Honorable Single Island Wide Member, Mr. Joseph Vanderpool, Honorable Single Island Wide Member, Mr. Kyle Hodge, Honorable Member for Valley North, Mrs. Shelia Rogers Webster. We have two special members assisting the committee, Mr. Rudolph Proctor and Mrs. Hyacinth Bradley. My name is Merrick Richardson. I'm the chair of the committee, and next to me is clerk to the committee is Ms. Vanisha Proctor. Mr. Rogers, we'll now invite you to give some opening remarks, and then we'll get into the questions and the dialogue, and we'll go. So your opening remarks, please.
Good morning, and thank you for having me here. Opening remarks. Everybody who knows me know the lifestyle I used to live. And if you don't know, then I will have to explain. At the age of 13 years old, raised up in St. Croix. It wasn't no easy life coming up, get involved in the wrong company, doing the wrong things, and ain't deciding hard like mother or father to guide me. It's just a lifestyle I had choose. And even at that age, 13, I thought I know everything. You understand? It's like when somebody tell you something, you're like, oh, I know. You know, and this time we just learning about life. You understand? So my thing is the youths now, they just need guidance. People to talk to them who been in that lifestyle and see it don't worth it. They need to step up and mentor them, mentor the youths. And that's what I have for right now. But if y'all have any questions, you could ask.
Good morning, Mr. Rogers. Thanks for coming before us, and thanks for opening up your life and sharing your testimony with us. I think you have a very unique perspective or influence out of all of our witnesses, because as you speak, I think you have the potential to directly touch persons who are currently involved in such a lifestyle. And I just hope that they're listening to hear your story. My first question to you is, what are your thoughts about our current situation in Anguilla and where we're at today? I'm sure you would have seen the past few years as things progress. What are your thoughts as today and how things have been changing over the past few years?
Well, as I said earlier, we have to guide the youths. And if they ain't getting the right guidance, who teaching them? Who they talking to? That is where we gotta ask the question, who are the youths talking to? You see, sometimes, like when I was young, as I explained, I thought I had the things figured out. So now if somebody who living in a wrong fashion of life come to my child and tell my child, man, this is way of life. Look, this is gun, this is a gun here, this is drugs here. Go on the black and make yourself some money. What do you think will happen to you? He think that's the way of life. Making money, what? And they think life is all about just making money, but they ain't telling them the value of life and money, you understand? So once we don't know the value of things, we tend to gravitate to the wrong way. But if the youths get guidance now to let them know, okay, invest in a brighter future. Instead of taking gun and drugs, You got this amount of, listen, go to the bank. You to a certain age, go to the bank. You got homes, build homes. People need to live in places. Build houses, build, businesses. That's what I did when I came here. I started a business, but look, when I started I should have been young when I started this business. I started at an old age, and the business is doing well for itself. So for me now to guide the youths, I will tell them to invest in businesses and houses, real estate.
So, going back to your opening statement, you'd have said when you were 13 years old, it wasn't that you didn't have parental guidance, it was the fact that you chose that lifestyle. And it was predominantly because you felt that you knew it all. For the sake of, for the committee, how do we reach out to persons at that stage when they have that mentality? You ask the question, who are they talking to? And we need to reach out to them and offer them guidance. How do we get through to a 13-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 17-year-old who has followed that lifestyle to get them to be receptive of what we have to tell them in our guidance when they think that they know it all?
How do you get to them? The 13-year-old reacts. Then again, you see, you have to just groom their minds. You got to groom their minds, because understanding is everything. When we have lack of understanding, that is where the problem lies.
So by grooming their minds, if I understand you correctly, we need to start earlier than that. We need to bring them up so that at 13 we don't have that issue.
Correct.
Thank you. I'll pause my questioning just in case any of my colleagues want to jump in.
You touched on grooming minds. So that led me to ask this question. Do you think that the influence of certain types of music, videos, games, that, that is having an impact, whether it's the video games that, involves a gun, whether it's the music that, sings about violence? Do you think that, what kind of impact do you think that is happening, that is causing on our young people today?
That's a very good question, because that's actually shaping your mind into the kind of music you listen to. That's what you're gonna gravitate to, and that's the lifestyle you're gonna gravitate to. You understand? So I remember back in the days of rap music, you listen to songs like Biggie and Tupac and all them gangster rappers, and your life start shaping with them, because when they start talking about these things, you want to be a part of it. You're hearing about it and now you live in it. So that is a very good question.
So you're saying that lyrics really play a major part?
Yes, words is power. I'm very, very powerful.
Okay, Mr. Rogers, there's a certain level of fear that exists amongst our youths in Anguilla, throughout the entire island. Youths from east, west, north, and south, they speak about being fearful that someone they had conflict with in the past, that person, that individual, might be armed, might have a gun, and hence we need to, seek a gun as well. Is the gun the problem? Or is the problem more or less, issues within our community?
Guns have always existed. So I don't think the problem is the guns. It's the individuals. And as you said, that persons will be a fear at this person, and then when they take up a gun, I think that's when they make matters worse. Because then again, I said words is powerful. If I could diffuse you with a soft answer, you want to kill me, and I could say, partner, listen, me and you never had no issue. It shouldn't get to that point. I diffuse you because now you know, okay, I ain't no threat to you. You understand? So therefore, the beef done. But now if I get a gun now and I step a man and he know I got a gun, he gonna try to take me out. He gonna try to take my life away from me. And then I gonna have to try to take away because I hear him words talking, he want to take me out, so what you think gonna happen? There's gonna be a war and it's gonna be bloody. You know, so the gun ain't a problem. It's the way you deal with the matter.
So in essence, it's a mentality that we need to have as people, because the gun is not the problem. Earlier on, we had a lawyer in here, Mr. Hodge, who spoke about his support for armed neutrality, meaning that we should all be able to go through the system and have a firearm, but it's the responsible use of firearm he was really supporting. As someone that has been in the community from 13 years old, coming up, been involved in many different things, would you support the right for citizens to have arms, to have guns, to be armed?
Well, guns ain't the problem, as I said. The individual who have the gun, if it's a responsible individual, I would say, why not? At my age, 13, carrying a gun wasn't a good thing. But still, I had to. You understand? I still had to. But then it's when I reach a certain age, I had to ask myself a question, if this is the life I want. When I reached 17, I said, Mom, listen, it's either I gonna kill somebody or somebody gonna kill me, because the anger was in me and I got a gun. I figured like I could deal with this myself. So instead of me going out there and shooting up people, I talked to my mother. I could communicate with my mom and say, Mom, listen, either you're gonna kill somebody or somebody gonna kill me, because you're out there, you're selling drugs, you're making money. People didn't want to see that, especially rivals. They see you, they didn't want you to make no money. So my mom said, okay, before you get to that point, let me send you away. She sent me away. I learned a trade. My first trade I was doing was drywall, little construction, plumbing. But I didn't like that. So I tell her I don't like that. So I have the certificate for that. But then I went on and I studied welding, which I had more passion for. I take up welding. It's something to relax my brain and something to make a life. And right now I feel comfortable with that, and I'm glad I choose that trade. Instead of taking gun trade, I take up a make gun now. And I could just, do my little iron work.
Mr. Rogers, Mr. Vanderpool touched on it earlier when you answered grooming. But I'd like to question you can even give it to me from your perspective as a 13-year-old. How do a boring old man like myself convince a young 13, 14-year-old to go the good path, to go the right path, as opposed to competing against the same music we spoke about earlier, the bling bling and all the showboating that would come from the other side, when they only show that this is the good life? How do you convince? How do you, Henry, now convince 13-year-old Henry that that's not the way to go?
Well, we're here now. We're talking about it. We're using words as a tool. And now it's for the parent to let the 13-year-old into these conversations and don't think, oh, they're too smart. Nah. They have knowledge of these things. They need to be sitting around and they need to be listening to these kind of meetings what we have in here. And we just don't just have to have one. And not just, I'm not the only person who's been through it. They have many more. But they just need to come out. If they want us to get better, I think that's what they need to do. If they want the youths to be better, I think that's what they need to do. Come out and support.
Mr. Rogers, you mentioned earlier that parenting, as far as you are concerned, was no issue. What were some of the influences outside of your family situation and the block and the school that led you towards that life that you say you choose?
Money. Having it, money. My parents, I'll go to them and, Mom, let me get this amount of money. They're busy building, so they ain't had the money. So I said, man, you working every day. Yeah, working every day. Why are you working for? Rack stones? So I think I could have do better. You understand? And I was making a lot of money, but ain't no way it was leading to. You understand? That road of destruction. 'Cause I could have been dead. At that age, the life I live in, many of my friends die. You understand? They can't talk about it. Some get crippled. Those could talk about it. You understand? The ones who lock up, they could talk about it. Because when I get locked up, I meet people who say, boy, your sentence, I wish I had your sentence. Because their sentence is life. You understand? So the money we're chasing, I get to understand life a lot better because I listen to people, listen to their testimony, their words. And that shaped my life.
So, when you got to the street to make money, I think you suggested earlier that you sold drugs. When you make the transition that it was necessary to have a firearm, I think you say you had two? Yeah. What caused you to want to have a firearm in your possession at that age?
The thing with selling drugs, right? You gotta make money. And if a man see you don't have a gun, what do you think happen? He gonna come take your drugs. He gonna come take your drugs and he gonna make you, he gonna belittle you. You understand? So you have to be, you gotta be tough. The lifestyle is a tough lifestyle, and to me, if I had to go back now, I wouldn't even want to touch drugs. You understand? Because I have a better understanding of life now. I had to live the hard way is what they say. I learned the hard way. So now I could tell somebody now, and if they're listening and they're wise, they will take my words serious. It don't make sense.
I wanted to ask a question when you were detailing your experience from 13 to 17, but you just touched on it a while ago, and that would have been going through those ages, especially at that time. What were your interactions with the police like, especially living that lifestyle? I do believe you'd have said that at some point you might have been in prison. So if you detail first your interactions with the police, for the young people who may be listening who think that till now they get away with it.
Well, with the police now, it's like later on in life. Even though I tell you I was still transforming, in until 30 years old is when I get rid of everything. Because remember, you still have your friends around, and you still don't want, when things get bad, you don't want to still do something. So that was like in later age, like in the 20s. That's when I filed prison, and that's the experience when I say I was trying to change. At 17, I didn't really change. I did a little bit of the work and everything, even in New York. But then when I went back to the Virgin Islands, you get back to your friends, and you link up. So that was a link with all the, and now from them small drugs into the big drugs, into the keys, you understand? So I get involved in that, and that is what I do the time for.
So when you talked about the evolution just now, so before I get into the evolution, so during your teenage years or before 18, you never had any interactions with the police?
Just to run from them. That's all. When you got drugs and gun in your waist, yeah, run.
Okay, thank you. So you'd have mentioned you start off from the small stuff, you move up to a bit bigger and heavier until you eventually get to the keys. Was that progression something that was forced upon you? Were you encouraged to do more, or was it that by making money from this I can step up my game? What resulted in that progression?
Well, when you walk in, right, and you see the bills coming, and you think that that's the only way, like you know that way of life, and you say, you keep on thinking, oh, boy, things hard. God, link up my boys and try to get things, you know what I mean? So that is what led me to that. When hard life hit, I thought that was the best decision. But that was the worst decision.
Okay. I'll go back to when you were speaking about parenting. Now, I'll ask my parenting question twofold. Were your parents aware of some of the activities, or you were able to live a whole secret life away from your home life? So was there a Henry out in the streets and a Henry at home?
Very good question. Because you just bring me back that when I on the tough line, right, with the boys, when my father driving his truck, right, and they looking out to see if they see me, all the bigger fellas will come in front, and I'll go behind of them, and I'll hide. You understand? And then when my father them gone around the corner to go home, I bust out through the shortcut, cut there, wash up myself, clean up my hand, brush up my teeth good, because you know I've been smoking. So I just show them like a different life. You understand? So it was a secret life. You understand? But still I was tough in the house. I was tough because I got a bigger brother and a bigger sister and they couldn't play with me. So I had to show them I tough too.
In your views, from what you're seeing in the communities, do you think that parents nowadays are they dropping the ball when it comes to being able to lead their children on that straight and narrow?
I think they are. Because sometimes, I'll just give you a scenario. One situation happened, someone saw a child doing wrong, and they went to the parent of that child. And instead of the parent act on what the news, what they got about the child, instead they act on the child and deal with the child, they tell the child, the person who gave them the information. You understand? And then when the child went back to the person now, I think that was rude. And the parent didn't do nothing about it. So I think they dropped the ball. And they got to pick it back up.
Sir Rogers, you've indicated to us this morning that you've been on the streets, you've been involved, you in selling drugs, you had possession of firearm, but you now have changed your life to be something more productive to society. You have you've got a trade. What would you say to young people in the ages of 13 up to 17, the steps to walk away from drugs and violence, possession of firearm violence in general? How could they walk away? What do they need to do to walk away?
Well, in my opinion, I will just suggest that they will the friends. If you see a friend on a wrong path, you could tell him, boy, you're going the wrong way and not in the right way. And then you could walk away. If he don't change, you go to somebody who's doing something better. Because you know they say when you hang with birds, eagles, you're soar. But when you hang with wolves, you know what I'm saying? So try to go with the eagles.
I am interested in how we were speaking earlier of how the older guys would hide you and basically encourage you in your wrongdoings. So that my question is, what part do communities, for the good and for the bad, because they are those the ones who are sheltering you from your parents, they are also part of the community, and the preachers and everyone else who's trying to do good, they are also part of the community. How are communities from both sides playing their role in keeping our young people in line and away from gang crime and gun violence?
Well, I ask how the people are keeping the youths away.
No, well, on one end, how are they being dragged into it? On one end, how are they being dragged into it? Like the folks, like you guys who would have hidden you from your parents. How are communities, how are those set of guys pulling our young men away from what they should be doing? How is that happening?
Well, you're gonna always have that set, you know. You're gonna always have that set. But as I say, is when they doing the wrong, if I were back in it, like why no no, I wouldn't be around there. I wouldn't be around that crowd. That's why my advice is to go with people who doing things, because they will bring you places. People who doing good things, positive things, gonna bring you up. They're gonna bring you up.
I know you would have told us about, for example, with young people, what we need to do is work on grooming their minds. And that's a longer term thing, because we have to start working on the young people now to help them grow into those values. For the people who are already enshrined in that lifestyle at this point, who even still might be considering, I want to get out of this lifestyle, but I so deep into it, I may not know the way out. For us as a committee, for us as parliamentarians, what strategies could we put in place that would be effective in removing some of these guns from our street? I'll give an example. I know that in some places, and even here in Anguilla, they have offered amnesty periods where they say, okay, bring forth the firearm, and if anything, like, you won't be charged. And I know that there are some trust issues, so maybe we need to talk about trust. But they even then say, give it to somebody else, contact someone you trust and bring it in. In your opinion, do these programs work? And if they don't work, what kind of programs could we consider putting in place that would actually make some traction to removing some of the illegal firearms off of our streets?
I don't think they're gonna work. Honestly, them programs, because once you do somebody something, the person ain't gonna never forget. That always lie with them. It's just like, yeah. But my thing is, in the Bible have days where people, when they do something, manslaughter or whatever, they have to go away before the avengers catch them, because blood have been shed, eh? And if you stay in the same place, the people is they're gonna want revenge, and that's human being. The only how that they ain't gonna want is if they change their lifestyle. You understand? And forget about it. But the best thing for them to do, if they're too deeply involved, just go someplace else. Make yourself, a better life, because they're gonna always lie with you.
Mr. Rogers, you mentioned that at some point in time you served some time in prison in the Virgin Islands.
That was Puerto Rico and America, Georgia.
Right. What impact serving those sentences and those facilities were like? Did it have any impact on your life, or in helping you to form an opinion about what you were involved in and the need to step away from that life?
Well, to be honest with you, if the system was a little more harsh, they wouldn't get so much people going in there.
Okay.
I mean, it's actually like a hotel. It's actually like a hotel in there. You're well taken care of. You could choose what kind of food you want. If a criminal don't like to work, I like to work. You understand? If I didn't like to work, I would have go back there anytime. Yeah. It's like it's better than life you have. I ain't got to pay no bills. You understand? You got commissary. You buy whatever. If you don't like the food from the cafeteria, you cook your own food. We used to cook in a microwave. You understand? You got TV. Come on, AC. Lifestyle out there, I tell you, just like a hotel. So if they will keep on encouraging people to go in them places, you're going to have a lot of criminals, because a lot of people don't like to work.
Mr. Rogers, do you think our communities are becoming desensitized to gun violence? Like, we don't care, it doesn't affect us anymore, like it once used to?
I can remember when one death was a problem here in Anguilla. It used to affect the whole village. Now the people, like, they don't care. You have sometimes they're like, oh, you hear this happened, that happened. I say, like, wow, when? Because with the news, I guess it's happening like so much now. And like people, as you say, they get desensitized. I think so. Yeah.
What do you think, Mr. Rogers, based on, since you have been living in Anguilla, and you've been here now for quite a few years, well, is causing the young people in particular in Anguilla to turn to violent crime with the use of firearms? We don't seem to have the blocks that exist in some jurisdictions around here. Maybe the blocks that you mentioned you used to hang up on when you live in the Virgin Islands. They are not clearly marked, as they are in some of the, even in the United States. There are shoes thrown over the electrical lines that indicates this is a hot area, this is an area where you can get this and you can get that. You don't see that here. So what do you think is causing some of the young people to turn to violent crime here in Anguilla? Based on your experience.
Well, what you're looking at right now is the young people think that a bad name is good. They want to get street credibility. So they hear this person bad, that person bad, they want to be just like that person. You understand? So when a bad man become your role model, you're going to try to live up to that standard. And that's just my thing on it.
You mentioned that prison life, your prison experience in Puerto Rico and the U.S. was like living in a hotel. Are you suggesting that an increase in terms of the sentencing, the penalties, what I should say here, whatever the policies are within the prison system should increase, be more rigid in terms of dealing with these persons who are involved in gun crime?
Well, if you give them long sentence, that's a long more time of relaxation. So I don't even think that's gonna make sense. But cut off the AC. Let them go back and pound in some racks. Go back to hard labor. I bet you they wouldn't go.
You know, we have to take into consideration human rights issues, and there's a duty to care when you bring somebody under that sort of control. So some of those things, courts, human rights people will frown on, but we're just trying to see what would help in there, because you paint it as a picture of ease, that when persons pass through those systems and come out, that they have this urge to want to return, and that is what we are trying to work to prevent.
Yeah, well, humans got a right to behave themselves too, the same way they have the right to get punished. You know, you have to be penalized for your action, and that is why I strongly believe in.
Strongly agree.
What would you recommend to combat the gun crime and violence here in Anguilla? What recommendations you would give to parents, parliamentarians, the lawmakers, the police force? What would be your recommendations to even to our communities? What would you recommend?
Well, it starts from the house, your home. As bad as I was bad, ain't nothing could have gone in my mother's house. You can't go into the house with that, because she gonna know. Because my mother always in our room, she will clean up that room, search that room, make sure that room's safe. So my advice is to all parents, don't let your children them get that privacy where they can lock up room and have this, and don't, you can't go in my, no. If you gonna live in my house, let me know what's in your room. Currently, my house don't have no doors, and the children room, I got a door in my room. But they don't got none. I know why. Easy access to go in there. You don't hide nothing in my house. No guns is welcome in my house.
Recommendations to police, recommendations to the lawmakers. What would you recommend in terms of, because you gave your recommendations what you would give for the parents. Just some more recommendations up the line.
Recommendation for the police. I never really do no police work, so I even know how to recommend them. Mr. Parra over here, he'll be able to help us.
Our laws when it comes to do you think our laws need to be tighter? Do you think our laws need to, do you think we need stiffer penalties when it comes to our gun laws?
Yes, stiffer penalties is good. And tighter security. What I realize in Anguilla, right, is so much different than any other countries. I don't see no cameras like, if I was in a game, right? You know, you just see no cameras in these places, like, but look at this. This is an area you could just cut through, boop, boop, boop. Yeah, so the criminals, them done looking around, ain't got this, ain't got that. What you think they're gonna do? Use that for their advantage. They need more camera, they need more security, more, what you call a foot on the ground, officers.
You were trying to get your train of thought, but Mr. Rogers, we thank you for joining us on this session. Thank you for accepting our invitation. We'll now give you a chance to make your closing remarks.
All right, well, thank you for having me here, and it was nice, you know. I hope that the people will listen, because remember, our words powerful, and we need to really get to the young ones. And as y'all say, the older ones, them that already involved, some done went away. And you hear the good, what happening with them, you hear they're doing better. You understand? So that's like a change in life. So at least when they come back here, because when I used to go back St. Croix, I went like later on in life, when everybody get older and things settle down, but still, couldn't take no chances. A week in, and I gone. You understand? So just to be more careful with the life, and just don't take life for granted. I pray that we will get better and we could shape the youth's mind. But the ones now, if we shape these youth's mind, they will be able to turn to shape the youths who coming up mind, and then we'll have a more positive generation. You understand? So in time to come, I guess we just start working on things like these here, getting other persons to speak on the experience if they're willing. And it'll be a good thing if they do come. Thank you again for having me.
Just one final thing, I just want to clear up, you almost cleared up the part. How easy is it to walk away from gang life or that street corner life? And I know you mentioned that when you go back to the US, most of the folks who you would have grown up would have grown up, but you still in and out, which indicates to me that you still have a little fear about going back to your community and freely moving around. How easy is it to walk away?
Well, it ain't easy to walk away because it's just like a life. I mean, as I say, when I go there, I don't really go to stay. You understand? Because you can't trust people. You don't know what they hold in the heart for you. So as it ain't hard to walk. It's when you walk away at the young age is better. Because I was about 17, so ain't much I could do in that time frame. But what about those who stayed? Right now, we got a lot of friends in America. them can't really go back St. Croix.
Mr. Rogers, again, thank you for, first of all, accepting the committee's invitation. Thank you for coming here and sharing with us. I hope some of the words that you did share with us would touch someone, and your life experience could cause someone to change the trajectory that they are on now. So once again, thank you for joining us. This brings a close to our public hearings. We thank those of you who have joined us on radio and those of you who have joined us on the web. We will now go back to the lab, so to speak, and continue our work, and we'll be coming up with a report. So we just ask persons to bear with us. Our report is due by the end of September. Yes, by the 30th of September, our report is due to the public. So we just ask you to bear with us as we get that produced. Thanks again for joining us.